What if I told you that the biggest heroin operation in British history was run from a takeaway shop, earning just £12,000 a year? Picture this. Steam rising from fresh pizzas, the sizzle of kebabs on the grill, families ordering their Friday night treats. Now imagine that same kitchen serving as the headquarters for a multi-million-pound drug empire that poisoned communities across Britain. How many times have you ordered from your local takeaway, never questioning what really goes on behind those kitchen doors? How many times have you smiled at the friendly owner, handed over your money, completely unaware of what that cash might be funding? This story will change how you see every corner shop forever. Because what you're about to hear isn't just about crime. It's about the devastating power of deception, the fragility of trust, and how ordinary people can become instruments of extraordinary evil. If stories like this fascinate you, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to hear will shock you to your core. This isn't just another crime story. This is a masterclass in manipulation that fooled an entire community and nearly destroyed countless lives. What drives an ordinary man to build an empire of destruction? What makes seemingly normal people abandon everything they believe in for money? And how does a simple pizza shop become the nerve center of Britain's most sophisticated drug operation? The answers lie in the twisted genius of one man, a man who understood that the best place to hide evil is behind a smile, a warm meal, and the trust of an unsuspecting community. This is the story of Fikri Yarasir and how he turned Glossop into ground zero for a criminal empire that stretched from Turkey to every corner of the UK.
Meet Fikri Yarasir, short, unassuming, with a heavy mustache that gave him an almost grandfatherly appearance. If you saw him on the streets of Glossop, Derbyshire, you'd think nothing of him. Just another hard-working immigrant trying to make an honest living. That's exactly what he wanted you to think. But Yarasir's story didn't begin in that quiet market town. It began in the criminal underworld of European drug trafficking, where he'd already earned the reputation that would make seasoned criminals nervous. In the late 1990s, he was caught red-handed moving heroin from Turkey through Germany. Not small amounts, industrial quantities that could flood entire cities with poison. 10 years, that's how long he spent behind bars in a German prison. 10 years to think, to plan, to perfect his next move. When he was finally released, Germany didn't just let him walk free. They deported him and banned him from ever returning. For most people, that would be the end of the story. For Yarasir, it was just the beginning of something far more sinister. Somehow, this banned criminal mastermind slipped into the UK undetected. Think about that for a moment. A man with a 10-year-long prison sentence for international drug trafficking simply vanished into British society. He chose Glossop deliberately, a small, trusting community where nobody asked too many questions about the quiet man who opened a little takeaway called Yummies. On paper, Yarasir was earning just £12,000 a year, barely enough to survive, let alone thrive. He played the part perfectly, the struggling business owner, grateful for every customer, working long hours just to keep his doors open. Neighbors probably felt sorry for him. Local families became regulars, bringing their children for birthday treats, never knowing they were funding their own community's destruction. But this wasn't incompetence or bad luck keeping his official earnings so low. This was camouflage. This was a master criminal hiding in plain sight, using the most innocent business imaginable as cover for something unthinkably dark. The genius of it is breathtaking in its simplicity. Who suspects a pizza shop? Who questions the friendly owner serving your family dinner? Food brings people together. creates trust, builds community bonds. Yarasir weaponized that trust, turned it into his greatest asset. Every pizza sold, every kebab served, every smile exchanged over the counter was part of an elaborate performance. While customers chatted about their days and children played in the corner, Yarasir was orchestrating something that would eventually touch every corner of Britain's drug trade. He wasn't just serving food, he was serving destruction, one seemingly innocent transaction at a time. The most chilling part? He was good at it, really good. So good that for years nobody suspected that the man making their Friday night dinner was simultaneously poisoning their community with heroin.
Every criminal empire needs soldiers, and Yarasir understood that the best conspirators are those who don't look like criminals at all. He didn't recruit from the streets or prisons. Instead, he built his network from ordinary people, leading ordinary lives. People so unremarkable that investigators would never suspect them. Take Armit Toscan, who worked right alongside Yarasir in the takeaway. Picture him, apron on, hands covered in flour, serving customers with a smile. But when the shop closed and the last customer left, Toscan transformed into something else entirely. He became the logistics coordinator for a heroin smuggling operation that would make international cartels envious. Toscan's specialty was furniture, not assembling it or selling it, but using it as camouflage for death. Sofas, wardrobes, dining tables, innocent household items that families would welcome into their homes, never knowing they'd been packed with pure heroin during their journey from Turkey. Toscan had perfected the art of concealment, turning family furniture into Trojan horses filled with poison. But moving heroin is only part of the equation. You need infrastructure, legitimate businesses to provide cover. Enter Brian Kennedy, operating from Scotland with what appeared to be a perfectly normal transport company. On paper, Kennedy was just another small business owner, moving goods across the UK. In reality, his trucks were the arteries of Yarasir's empire, pumping drugs and money through Britain's motorway system. The beauty of Kennedy's operation was its legitimacy. Real cargo, real deliveries, real paperwork. Everything looked exactly as it should to any casual observer. But hidden within those legitimate shipments were packages that would destroy lives across the country. Kennedy had turned Britain's own transport infrastructure into his personal drug highway. Then there were the money runners, Paul Wivesey and Catherine Farron. Think about them for a moment. Two people living seemingly normal lives in Manchester, probably with friends, family, neighbors who thought they knew them well. But several times a year they'd board flights to Turkey, carrying hundreds of thousands of pounds in drug money to pay the suppliers who kept Yarasir's pipeline flowing. Imagine sitting next to them on a plane, maybe chatting about holiday plans or the weather, completely unaware that the person beside you is carrying hundreds of thousands of pounds in drug money. They looked like tourists, acted like tourists, but they were actually the financial lifeline keeping one of Britain's biggest criminal operations alive. In Wales, Stephen Hindley ran what insiders called the Bash House, a nondescript lock-up garage where pure Turkish heroin was transformed into street-ready poison. Hindley wasn't some stereotypical drug dealer. He was methodical, careful, treating his deadly work like any other trade. He'd dilute the pure heroin, cutting it with various substances to maximize profits, then press it into blocks ready for distribution. The human cost of Hindley's work is staggering. Every gram he processed would eventually find its way into someone's bloodstream. Teenagers experimenting for the first time, adults trapped in addiction, families watching helplessly as their loved ones spiraled into destruction. But to Hindley, it was just business, just another day at his private workshop of misery. David Mulligan kept the operation running smoothly by sourcing equipment. Forklifts, scales, packaging materials, all the mundane tools that made mass drug distribution possible. Like the others, Mulligan probably seemed completely ordinary to anyone who met him. Just a man with connections in the logistics world, happy to help out for the right price. Are you shocked by how normal these people seemed? Let me know in the comments what you think drives ordinary people to make these choices. Because that's what makes this story so terrifying. These weren't hardened criminals from the streets. They were people who could be your neighbors, your colleagues, people you'd trust with your children. Each person Yarasier recruited was a cog in his machine, carefully chosen and perfectly positioned. Separately, they were unremarkable. Together, they formed the backbone of a multi-million-pound heroin empire that stretched from the mountains of Turkey to the streets of British cities. What looked like a collection of small, unconnected businesses was actually a sophisticated criminal network that could move drugs and money across international borders with deadly efficiency.
By the time Yarasier's network hit full stride, it wasn't just operating, it was dominating. This wasn't some small-time drug-dealing operation run from a back alley. This was an industrial-scale enterprise that moved heroin through Britain like a legitimate supply chain, touching communities from Scotland to Wales, from Manchester to London. Picture the scope for a moment. Turkish suppliers producing pure heroin in mountain laboratories. Smugglers concealing it in furniture bound for Britain. Kennedy's transport company using those deadly deliveries across motorways filled with innocent families. The Bash House in Wales processing tons of poison. Distribution networks spreading that poison to dealers in cities and towns across the country. The numbers are staggering. We're talking about millions of pounds flowing through this network. Millions of pounds that started with families ordering pizza on a Friday night and ended up funding misery on an unimaginable scale. Every successful shipment meant more heroin flooding British streets, more lives destroyed, more families torn apart by addiction. But here's what makes this story even chilling: the sophistication. This wasn't chaos or lucky accidents. This was precision. Yarasier had created a system so elegant in its simplicity and so brutal in its effectiveness that it could have continued indefinitely if not for one fatal flaw: human nature. The impact on communities was devastating in ways that statistics can't capture. Think about the teenager in Manchester who tried heroin for the first time, not knowing it came from Yarasier's network. Think about the mother in Scotland watching her son disappear into addiction, helpless to save him from poison that had traveled hundreds of miles to destroy her family. Think about the emergency rooms filling with overdose victims, the social workers overwhelmed by the surge in drug-related crime, the teachers watching pupils drop out as addiction took hold. Each gram of heroin that moved through Yarasier's pipeline carried with it a ripple effect of destruction. Families destroyed, communities poisoned, young lives cut short, all so that a man serving pizza could accumulate wealth and power beyond imagination. The betrayal runs deeper than just criminal activity. This was a violation of the most basic social contract. When you welcome someone into your community, when you support their business, when you trust them with your family's well-being, you're creating bonds that civilized society depends on. Yarasier didn't just break the law, he weaponized that trust, turned it into an instrument of mass destruction. And the most terrifying part? It almost worked perfectly. For years, the system hummed along like a well-oiled machine. Investigators had no idea that Britain's biggest heroin operation was being run from a takeaway shop in Derbyshire. They were looking for the usual suspects: established crime families, known smuggling routes, obvious criminal enterprises. They weren't looking at the friendly pizza shop owner who remembered his customers' names and asked about their families. They weren't investigating the transport company in Scotland, or the furniture dealers moving household goods. The network's greatest strength was its invisibility, its ability to hide in plain sight among the honest businesses that formed the backbone of British commerce. But here's what investigators didn't know. They weren't dealing with just one network. Hundreds of miles south, in the heart of East London, another piece of this criminal puzzle was taking shape. A piece that would ultimately expose just how deep and wide Turkish organized crime had penetrated British society. The contrast between calculated precision in the north and reckless violence in the south was about to reveal the true scope of what Britain was facing.
While Yaroslav orchestrated his empire from the quiet streets of Glossop, East London was witnessing a very different kind of criminal evolution. In Hackney, 9 young Turkish men had formed what could only be described as a crew, not the disciplined, careful operation Yaroslav preferred, but something raw, violent, and ultimately self-destructive. These weren't seasoned criminals like Yaroslav. They were young, angry, and hungry for reputation. Where Yaroslav understood the power of invisibility, they craved visibility. Where he cultivated respectability, they embraced notoriety. Where his network whispered, theirs screamed. The crew had been building their reputation through violence, marking their territory in East London through intimidation and brutality. But reputation built on violence has a way of demanding more violence, and in May 2018, their aggression finally spilled beyond their usual targets into something that would expose them to scrutiny they couldn't handle. It was a street attack that shocked even hardened observers. Strangers became victims. Innocent people going about their daily lives suddenly caught in the crossfire of a crew desperate to prove their dominance. The details are almost too brutal to describe. Multiple victims left scarred, both physically and psychologically, by an attack that seemed to serve no purpose beyond demonstrating that these 9 men were capable of extreme violence. But here's what makes this story so chilling. This wasn't random. This was Turkish organized crime adapting to British streets, taking traditional methods of territorial control and applying them in a new environment. The Hackney crew wasn't separate from larger networks like Yaroslav's. They were part of the same ecosystem, different branches of the same poisonous tree. Think about what this reveals. While Yaroslav was perfecting the art of invisible crime, using respectability and trust as weapons, young Turkish criminals in London were establishing dominance through fear and violence. 2 completely different approaches, but serving the same ultimate purpose: expanding Turkish criminal influence across British society. The contrast is striking. In Derbyshire, a middle-aged man in an apron serving families their dinner while coordinating international drug smuggling. In London, young men using brutal violence to carve out territory and establish criminal credibility. Calculated patience versus explosive aggression. Invisible integration versus visible intimidation. What happened next will shock you, because investigators were about to discover that these weren't separate incidents, but connected pieces of a criminal network that had penetrated British society far deeper than anyone imagined. The pizza shop in Glossop and the street crew in Hackney were part of the same criminal ecosystem, different expressions of Turkish organized crime adapting to British opportunities. The sophistication of Yaroslav's operation provided the infrastructure. The violence of the Hackney crew provided enforcement and territorial control. Together, they represented something unprecedented, a foreign criminal network that has successfully integrated into British society at multiple levels, from respectable business ownership to street-level intimidation. The full scope of what Britain was facing was about to become terrifyingly clear.
Every criminal empire contains the seeds of its own destruction, and for Yaroslav's network, those seeds were sown in the very success that made them so dangerous. The bigger the operation became, the more people it required. The more people it required, the greater the chance that someone would make a mistake, get careless, or simply get caught. It wasn't a dramatic moment that brought them down. No Hollywood-style raids or high-speed chases. It was methodical police work, the kind of painstaking investigation that follows financial trails, monitors communications, and slowly builds an unshakable case. Investigators began to notice patterns, money movements that didn't match declared incomes, travel patterns that seemed unusual for legitimate businesses, connections between seemingly unrelated people across different cities. The breakthrough came when authorities finally connected the dots between the various operations. That furniture business moving items from Turkey wasn't just importing household goods. That transport company in Scotland wasn't just moving legitimate cargo. Those frequent flights to Turkey weren't just holidays. And that quiet pizza shop owner in Glossop wasn't just struggling to make ends meet on £12,000 a year. When the raids finally came, they were coordinated across multiple locations simultaneously. Picture the scene. Armed police surrounding Yumif Takeaway, while Yarasir was probably preparing for another ordinary day of serving pizza and coordinating international crime. Imagine his shock as his carefully constructed world collapsed in moments. The evidence they found was overwhelming. Financial records showing the true scale of the operation, communications revealing the sophisticated network of conspirators, physical evidence of the heroin pipeline that had poisoned communities across Britain. Yarasir's decade of patient planning and careful execution was destroyed in a single morning. But the most devastating moment for Yarasir must have been the realization that his perfect disguise had failed. The community that had trusted him, the customers who had supported his business, the neighbors who had treated him with kindness and respect, they now knew the truth. They knew that every time they'd ordered from Yummy's, they'd been funding their own community's destruction. The arrests rolled across the network like dominoes. Armit Taskin caught with the evidence of his furniture smuggling operation. Brian Kennedy, his transport company revealed as a criminal front. Paul Livesey and Catherine Farron exposed as money launderers disguised as tourists. Stephen Hindley, his Welsh bash house raided and shut down. David Mulligan, his equipment sourcing operation dismantled. Each arrest revealed more of the network's scope, more of its sophisticated operations, more of the damage it had inflicted on British society. The court proceedings that followed painted a picture of criminal organization that shocked even experienced prosecutors. This wasn't just drug dealing, this was criminal entrepreneurship on an industrial scale. The sentences reflected the severity of the crimes. Years in prison for each conspirator, but more importantly, the destruction of lives they'd built while living double existences. Families who'd had no idea their loved ones were involved in such criminal activity. Communities that had trusted these people, supported their businesses, welcomed them as neighbors. If this story moved you, please share it, because these are the stories that need to be told. Because the true cost of Yarasir's empire wasn't just measured in the heroin distributed or the money made. It was measured in trust destroyed, communities damaged, and lives lost to addiction. The truth was far worse than anyone imagined. A simple pizza shop had served as headquarters for one of Britain's most sophisticated criminal operations, operated by people who seemed so normal, so trustworthy, so much like the honest business owners they pretended to be. Justice had been served, but the scars would remain for years to come.
As the dust settles on this devastating story, we're left with questions that go far beyond crime and punishment. How do we rebuild trust when it's been so completely violated? How do communities heal when the very people they welcomed and supported were working to destroy them? The lesson here isn't just about being suspicious of everyone around us. That would destroy the social bonds that make communities strong. Instead, it's about understanding that evil rarely announces itself with obvious signs. The most dangerous criminals aren't the ones who look the part. They're the ones who perfect the art of looking completely normal. Yarasir's story teaches us that assumptions can be deadly. We assume that someone working 12-hour days in a small business is honest and hardworking. We assume that our neighbors, our service providers, the people we interact with daily are what they appear to be. Most of the time, we're right, but when we're wrong, the consequences can be catastrophic. Perhaps the most important lesson is about the real cost of the drug trade. It's not just about the users or the dealers we see on the streets. It's about the sophisticated networks that make it all possible. Networks that depend on our trust, our assumptions, our willingness to believe that people are generally good. The strength of communities like Glossop lies in their openness, their willingness to welcome newcomers and support local businesses. That strength became Yarasir's weapon, but it's also what will ultimately heal the damage he caused. Because for every criminal who exploits trust, there are thousands of honest people working to rebuild it. The story of Yummy's takeaway is over, but the lessons it teaches us about deception, trust, and the hidden dangers in our midst will remain relevant as long as humans are capable of both great good and terrible evil. If you found value in this story, subscribe for more true crime documentaries that reveal the hidden truths in our society. Comment below with your thoughts about how communities can protect themselves while still remaining open and trusting. And share this story, because sometimes the most important lessons come from the darkest chapters in human behavior. This has been Dark Truth Files, uncovering the stories that matter, the lessons that can save us, and the truth that's often stranger and more frightening than any fiction.